Award-winning futurist researcher and keynote speaker Nikolas Badminton joining us on Canada Now for his weekly visit. And Nick, question right out of the gate here. Have we ever been at a point where the political future is so wide open?
I mean, if you think about human civilization, and let's just anchor that point at like the beginning of the large cities like Uruk or whatever, so like 10,000, 11,000 years ago, right? Sure. I mean, at any point in time, we're looking ahead to what is ultimately uncertain futures. I mean, possible, probable, whatever. Nothing is ever certain. And in fact, that's what makes my job so interesting because, I explore the potentiality of our futures, right? But, your question, has the political future ever been so wide open? It's like, well, over the years, there have been marauders and dictators. There have been the invaders. There have been, the people that have been colonized and whatever. There's a constant modus operandi, I feel, in the world where the political system, alongside the development of the industrial revolutions over the last 270 or so years, has sort of, always sort of gone along with elements of control and certainty about who's going to win, or chaos when you look at things like Brexit or the 45th president of the United States or whatever. So it's like, is it wide open? Our futures are completely wide open. Do I feel that our political future is wide open? I'm really not so sure, and we can go into that.
Well, let's, because you might look back at the 70s and say, wow, this is going all over the place. But then, I guess in retrospect, maybe we didn't think it at the time, but Reagan is there. Thatcher is there for a really long time. And you get a couple of pillars like that have been, like them or not, but they were there for a very long time, and that seemed to kind of stabilize politics for a while. In their longevity is what I'm speaking to here, where we have, and the reason why we asked this was because Trump was president, as you alluded to. And Trump, very well could run again for all we know at this point. And when Biden was elected president over Trump, I looked at it and said, well, for my wants of the world, I thought, well, that's great. But at the same time, I don't see Biden being there for 8 years, mostly due to his age. So do we need some kind of stabilizing force, some political pillars to stabilize things politically?
Well, stabilization in this context ultimately means polarization towards party politics, one side or the other. I actually think that it's a time. And what's interesting about Biden is that he tries to cross the aisle, and he tries to build those bridges across, Republicans and Democrats. You can discuss all of the faults and merits of either side, right? I mean, personally, and with full transparency, I'm quite left-leaning. I mean, what's interesting here, though, is like, I'm not sure that idea of stability in terms of politics really delivers what we necessarily want. Let's look at Russia and let's look at China. So Putin is there until he dies in Russia, and Xi is there in China until he dies. The dragon bear, the best friends, the buddies, right? And I talk about this with a lot of my clients. These are two sort of, solid, chaotic sort of people that are in relationship with each other and trying to, sort of shake up the world in a way. Is that providing stability to their countries, or is it just providing a polarization and a system within which need to fall? And this is what we have to be really careful on. I mean, I was there, much like you, and I grew up in the UK under Margaret Thatcher. It was absolutely terrible to be in the UK under Margaret Thatcher. As soon as I could vote Tony Blair in, I could, and I did, and it all changed. And within 3 or 4 years, it kind of felt like, New Labour was the new Conservatives, yada, yada, yada. And it's like everything's sort of this amorphous political shape these days. But Reagan and Thatcher didn't provide stability. They just provided a platform for capitalist sort of acceleration, and ultimately in the UK, the working class to maintain their position, the middle class to rise up through yuppiedom into the Yahoo champagne days of the City of London, and literally selling off like governmental assets or country assets to the rest of the world. So, the water, all the water treatment and management facilities in London are owned by Macquarie. Macquarie is an Australian bank. Does that make sense? It makes absolutely no sense. Is that stability for the UK? Absolutely not. It's just a capitalist leaning on a new structure that's ultimately going to be failing. It's interesting. Come back to Canada. We've got a young leader in Trudeau, whether you like him or not. You've got a lot of other leaders that are literally just trying to make noise and not trying to create stability, just trying to create some kind of polarization to popularist ranks. And it's interesting. We've got an opportunity as someone like Canada to cross the aisle, to work together to do something really special, because ultimately, I think, the soft socialist elements in Canada, which is kind of what we're based on, are actually really useful parts of society. And I'm sat in the US right now, and there are probably people across the office that are hissing at me, right? But that's what I think is really interesting. I mean, you sent me this article to read, and at the end, it sort of said, our future is going to be more Leninistic than it is sort of capitalistic in a way. It's difficult, right?
Yeah. Do we need, like, if we're looking at what our future should be? I mean, it depends on perspective, but perspective. Do we need to have some delusion with our assumptions of the future to tie us all together?
So this is the problem. You're using future as a singular word, like we're aiming towards a single point in time. Well, as a foresight practitioner and futurist, I talk about futures are futures. There are many different futures. You and your family have got completely different futures than me and my family versus the people that live next to us in our communities, different cities, towns, cities, whatever, all over the world. So we have to be really understanding. Can we fundamentally come up with a unification of ideas? I mean, at the beginning of this article, it talks about, Peter Schwartz's, The Art of the Long View, very famous book in the foresight community, The Official Future. And he sort of set it down. And yes, he's updated that view or whatever. But what we have to think about, this conversation is a Western point of view. You go to Asia, you go to South America, you go to Africa, is wildly different. Ideas of the futures that lay ahead of us is different for everyone. And what we're trying to do, and what people are speculating, especially out of the West, is a colonialist sort of mindset of like, hey, here's the shape and size of the future. Isn't that great? Let's all subscribe to that. And ultimately, that's as bad as sort of the Berlin conference that carved up Africa for 14 countries or 13 countries, I think, across Europe, right? It's not what we should be doing. Right now, we should be understanding that there are multiple futures, there are multiple people that need to be listened to in terms of ideologies and beliefs. Ideologies are liquid and belief systems are liquid. How do we provide a place for people to exist, to come together, to ensure that we can all have great healthcare, great education, great overall sort of vibrancy within our communities? How can we bring everyone together to agree on some terms that aren't suddenly going to put people into boxes and strip away their cultural identities? Right?
Okay, I have a list for you, Nick. I have a list, because we don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you're the futurist. Sure. You have a better idea than I do, certainly. But I have a list of possibilities. And I want to know, looking as soon as 10 years down the road, would you exclude any of the following as a possibility? I'll go one by one and let you answer. The dismantling of the federal government.
Are we talking US or Canada here, Jeff?
Well, one I think is hand in hand. And maybe more so if it were to happen in the U.S. Sure. And then we'd see that and say, all right, well, maybe that's the way to go. I don't know, or maybe vice versa.
Yeah, the dismantling of the federal government. I mean, where does that statement come from? I mean, fundamentally, federal and state level policies, regulations, laws, and whatever are put into place ultimately to protect capitalism and the taxation system, right? So instead of saying dismantling the federal government, it's like a complete rethinking of capitalism. Is it likely going to happen in 10 years? No. Is it going to happen in the next 150? Absolutely.
Oh, okay. All right. Major wealth redistribution and universal basic income and services.
So this is really interesting. So UBI, Universal Basic Income, has actually been, sort of touted and pushed out. And in a number of places, like down in the US, has been parts of Oakland that actually started an experiment in Dauphin, Manitoba, happened many years ago, where UBI actually worked very, very succsuccessfully.
Yeah,
but
and they got rid of it.
Yeah, they got rid of it because the government changed, and governments are stupid sometimes. And so UBI, and it, if you look at CERB and all those things that we did in Canada, it's really interesting. That was kind of a form of UBI, except, the government wants the money back, right? Major wealth redistribution is just going to happen because all the boomers are going to die. And this is wild. The next 10 years, something like $30 trillion of wealth is going to be passed down from like boomers to Gen Xers and potentially down to millennials as well, right? So there will be a wealth transition. Will it be a major wealth distribution, i.e., all the billionaires in the world are suddenly gonna like distribute their wealth to people that need it? Not in 10 years, 150 years time. And the reason I'm saying 150 years time, let's be wild about our ideas about the futures. Maybe we're really gonna get rid of that ego and need for greed and capitalism in society, and we can really create that kind of beginnings of a Star Trek futures, right? Jeff, so maybe 150 years potentially.
All right, what about dictatorship in Canada and or the US?
Just don't see it. I don't understand where this is coming from, because dictatorship by other, there's going to be lots of people calling dictatorship on a number of different people. Dictatorship is ultimately authoritarian leadership until that leader fundamentally dies. Are we going to see like Canada and the US look like a modern North Korea? Absolutely not. It's ridiculous.
Okay, that's good. China's dominance in the world.
It's already there. It's completely dominant. It's controlling so much of what we consume. In terms of absolute dominance, cultural dominance in the world, I don't think so. I think you're going to have China, India. So China is going to be number one economic power in the world by 2030 based on GDP. India is going to be number two. And then you've got the US number three. In terms of economic dominance, they're already there. They're already sort of the de facto ringleader of Asian countries. So that's going to be really interesting. And they've done a lot of work with their Belt and Road Initiative across Africa and whatever. I think you're going to have, it's not absolute dominance, but wow, the West and the East, we need to work out how we can work together and really get rid of some of this bad blood. Because if we don't, we're potentially just going to be cut off, and the world's going to have two sides of the coin, the East and the West. And it's going to be everything from monetary systems to capitalist ways of working, e-commerce, applications, data, whatever. It's interesting times to live in, Jeff.
What about a race war?
A race war. We've had a race war since the beginning of time, Jeff. End of conversation.
It's not over? Yeah. All right.
No, not over, never over. It's like, it's been, let's talk about Thatcher's Britain. I grew up in Thatcher's Britain in a village of 4,500 white people with a slaughterhouse in the center of town. All of my friends were like the kids of the guys working in the slaughterhouse. At the weekends, those guys would go drinking in the pub for 3 days, and all the kids and whatever. There's lots of multi-generational trauma. There was lots of people coming in as big brothers, radicalization of thinking, like the National Front and neo-Nazi skinheads. And I was surrounded by that in the 1980s. That was real. That was visceral. That was in Thatcher's Britain. It's been here. It's been here since day one. It's like, who are you walking into my village from like hundreds of thousands of years ago to like, hey, who are you walking into my village today?
Yeah. All right. Finally, I'll ask you this one: a nuclear apocalypse.
This is the trope on the end of time and apocalypse. I just don't see it. I mean, we've had nuclear weapons hanging over the heads of everyone as sort of a pawn in the political game of chess. I just don't see it. I just don't see it. Never, ever.
And as long as it doesn't happen in the next couple of weeks, because we got a couple of more conversations left in 2021, one of which we need an update on your book, and we're going to get that in the next week or two, because you're this close. You're this close to having it done, and I want to get all the details on it in one of our two remaining conversations. Check out NikolasBadminton.com, futurist researcher, keynote speaker Nick Badminton. Appreciate it, Nick. We'll talk again next week.
This has been a wild episode, Jeff. I'll see you next week.
See you, man.